What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, I wanted to showcase some Guzzlord gameplay in the Ultra League. This Pokemon is a very interesting core breaker, sporting the Dragon and Dark typing, making it very weak to Fairies, but very strong against a lot of neutral game matchups and all the Ghosts and Psychics that are pretty common in Ultra League. So let's get into the battles and see what this team can do. Alright, first game of the day, Guzzlord in the lead up against a Shadow Galarian Weezing. Probably one of the worst leads you can see here. Don't really have a good answer, so I'm going to save swap our own Shadow Weezing. Our opponent brings in a Zygarde and instantly top lefts. I guess they must have misclicked. Love to see it there. Good way to start out the day here. Virizion, though, in the next battle, another kind of tricky Pokemon, but at least this time we do have two answers in the backline. We get a bit of an energy lead with our Shadow Galarian Weezing, and they are going to respond with a Shadow Drapion. Sludge is a very efficient move. Fairy Wind as well is going to add up over time, so despite not having any neutral charge moves here, I think we can flip this the longer it goes on. In comes an Aqua Tail, and despite the fact that it is neutral, it's non-stab, so it's not going to do anywhere near as much damage as they would likely want it to do. Sludge is going to come through once again. If they let this go, I might get a full Fairy Wind down, and because of our energy lead, the longer this goes, the more confident that I am that the Fairy Winds will put them into Sludge range, and that we will out CMP them, and potentially flip switch. Aqua Tail does get a shield here once again from us, but we're going to go for a Sludge and try to either get switch advantage or to get their final shield. Sludge is going to be thrown. Our opponent opts to no shield. They don't survive it, which is fantastic to see, and in comes a Shadow Steelix. So our team is a little bit soft to Steelix in general here, I will admit that, but we have Brutal Swing ready to go. We're going to try to bait and overheat. Maybe they're going to shield this, maybe they don't. It actually gets no shielded, unfortunately, but I guess at this point, any sort of chip damage is good. Guzzlord, despite likely taking super effective breaking swipes, will resist these Thunder Fangs and potentially be able to make it so our Drifblim in the backline should be able to close out when that Virizion does come back in. These breaking swipes don't do that much from the non-Shadow Steelix, saying they're non-stab Dragon-type charge moves, but we are still going to be, over time, potentially debuffed and just chipped down. Crunch is going to be debuffed now thanks to that breaking swipe. They're lowering our attack, but it will still do enough damage to at least start whittling down the Steelix and making it so our Drifblim is going to be a little bit safer in the back. We also get a defense drop of our own, which is fantastic to see. It neutralizes that one attack drop that we have already taken, and another breaking swipe, not quite enough to knock us out here. They try to snipe us down with a Virizion, but we can swap out now to our Drifblim, and they realize if they don't have Stone Edge, that is a terrible matchup. They top left there. GG's to our opponent. Next matchup, a Zygarde in the lead. This is honestly a lead where I have a good matchup kind of in the lead, but I have two Pokemon in the back that are honestly just so much better into it that I would much rather just swap out and try to get either my Drifblim or my Shadow Galarian Weezing switch locked into it later on. But if I do happen to lose switch advantage, it's not the end of the world. Guzzlord can have quite a bit of play into the opposing Zygarde. In comes a charge move. I would basically get knocked out by a Hydro Cannon here, so I'm going to shield this up, try to get some shields down if I can with our Weezing, and see how they want to play this out. I don't think Fairy Winds will be able to go for a full fast move down here in Ultra League the longer this matchup goes, so I think just trying to make it so this thing doesn't have a ton of energy coming out of this matchup will be the play. In comes our second shield. I want to make them throw another Hydro Cannon to knock us out here, and I can go for a Brutal Swing in just a second to either knock them out or at least attempt to. We go for a Dragon Tail Snipe down, but they don't end up falling for it. They can swap out right at the nick of time there, making it so now there's a lot of energy on that Shadow Feraligatr. Our Guzzlord will be able to chip down this Zygarde, but this is going to be a very scary endgame. In comes a charge move, likely going to be an Outrage, but it could be an Earthquake, maybe a Bulldoze, depending on their moveset. It is an Earthquake, luckily, so we do actually end up surviving, going for a Dragon Claw against them now to either finish off or grab the final shield from this Zygarde. In comes Dragon Claw. Our opponent does let it go, and their final Pokemon is revealed as a Registeel. We've seen that Steel-type Pokemon are a little bit of a nuisance for me. I'm going to go for a Crunch, try our very best to whittle down this Pokemon, but because we have no super effective charge move pressure, only neutral fast move and potentially neutral charge move pressure here with our Weezing and our Drifblim in the backline, this is going to be a very tricky game to win. Brutal Swing number 1 does end up coming through. Brutal Swing number 2 is going to trip them down even further, but not having Overheat is coming in to bite us right now. We do trip them down well into the yellow, but because Drifblim is going to have to deal with not only this Registeel, but also that Shadow Feraligatr, which did store a move, I don't know if we can win this game. I have to call a catch at some point, or a combo play that is, and try to catch a move on our Guzzlord if I want any chance to win this. We wait down our switch clock here. I know I can survive a Zap Cannon, but not super comfortably. I know at this point, though, if I do make a catch this game and I can make it so that Feraligatr is not going to be able to snipe us down, we can win, but in comes the Gator instantly. They are going to be able to get that combo play off against us and unfortunately take the game here. If he would have got that snipe down with our Guzzlord, that would not have happened. We would have been able to neutralize that Gator, but very well played by them. All right, next matchup, we're going to see a Galarian Weezing non-Shadow against our Guzzlord. Not a great lead matchup to see, but we're going to safe swap our own Weezing and just try to see what we can do here. They let us throw first, which likely means either they're not running Sludge, or maybe they're running Sludge and they want to overheat us here in just a second. So I'm going to keep that in mind. If they do throw a move after 7 Fairy Winds, which they do, that it is likely going to be an overheat. What is it going to be? Is it actually the big move? It is, so it's a good thing that we ended up realizing that, and they counter swap with a Lapras, a Psywave Lapras at that. So a lot of super effective fast move pressure here, as well as a lot of bulk on this Lapras. It's going to be a little bit tricky to take down, even though Sludge does do quite a bit of damage. At this point, I'm going to no shield. I know we can survive any move they're going to throw as long as it's not a Skull Bash, which they were nowhere near reaching. And I'm going to take the chance that they are not on Ice Beam with this Lapras. If they're on Skull Bash, this is not a terrible spot to be in. If they are on Ice Beam, though, it's going to be super effective against our Guzzlord, and that Weezing in the backline is going to be very tricky to take down. Crunch does not quite do enough to knock them out here, but it will put them into a farm down range potentially later on. What move are they going to throw? It is a Skull Bash, so a lot less damage than we take otherwise, and Weezing does end up coming back in here. Weezing obviously is going to throw a Charge Move. I'm expecting either an Overheat or a Brutal Swing, saying they didn't throw a Sludge against us earlier on this game, but they actually do have Sludge, meaning they do knock out our Guzzlord, which might be a little bit uncomfortable for us later on. With that said, I know Drifblim is going to be able to just shield this farm all the way down, because we know there is no Brutal Swing. They're going to go for an Overheat, and we can Astonish down before the second move is going to be reached. We have a decent amount of energy, but we have no shields to hide behind. We also have our Shadow Galarian Weezing, and our opponent has their own Guzzlord in the back. Icy Wind is super effective here, so it will chip them down over time and debuff their attack stat, but depending on the moveset and depending on if they ever catch a move, this could be kind of bad. Icy Wind coming in. Do they want to shield quite yet? At this point, they kind of have to, or else they're in risk of getting fast move farm down. They no shield, knowing I do have energy on a Shadow Galarian Weezing here, and now in comes their first charge move. They're double debuffed right now, so it might not one-shot us here, especially a Crunch wouldn't be enough. Brutal Swing, also not quite enough here. I try to go for a Snipe down, but they end up swapping out as well. I have a lot of energy here, though, on Weezing, and I'm one Astonish away from an Icy Wind with our Drifblim. So the win condition in this game right now is either knocking out this Lapras with his Brutal Swing and Fairy Winding down, or if they shield this, to Astonish down this Lapras and go for an Icy Wind against that Guzzlord when it comes back in. We do end up getting knocked out here, which is fine at this point. I can Astonish down, go for an Icy Wind now against this Guzzlord, and this game should be ours. This should be enough to knock them out. At this point, they are very low HP. Somehow, down 2 shields against a Dark-type Drifblim, able to come out on top and take us the win in this game. All right, next matchup here, Guzzlord up against the opposing Guzzlord, the shiny Guzzlord at that. Very interesting Pokemon to see here. Obviously, Guzzlord is going to be a super effective mirror matchup where both Pokemon are throwing super effective damage back and forth. In comes the Dragon Claw. Do they shield this up, or are they going to opt to just let it go? They do let the first one through, which is a very interesting play, but unfortunately for our opponent here, I win CMP once again, so they're going to have to shield if they want any chance of winning this matchup here, or at least getting their final move off. They do opt to shield, and unfortunately, since Guzzlord has so much HP, it doesn't quite get a shield KO. I'm going to no-shield at this point. We've done what we needed to do, but Sludge Bomb doesn't knock us out here, which means we actually win switch advantage, or well, shield advantage rather, and we tie with switch advantage. So we'll see what we end up coming in with here. In comes our Shadow Galarian Weezing. We bring in, okay, well, this is bad. Yeah, we can't beat that. Good stuff there. Unfortunately, the Steelix is just a bit too much to take down. All right, let's see what we're going to have in this next game, though. Guzzlord in the lead up against a Zygarde, a very neutral matchup. Once again, I have 2 Pokemon in the back that are so much better against this Pokemon, but last time I tried to swap out, it was a little bit of a tricky game, so this time I am staying in for just a second here, going for a Dragon Claw and seeing what our opponent wants to do. Dragon Claw ends up getting thrown. It does almost half of their health at this point, and these Dragon Tails are adding up over time as well. In comes a charge move. It could be an Earthquake, it could be an Outrage, it could be a Crunch if they are absolutely wild, which, because it is a Crunch, means that now I will have to throw another charge move if I don't want to take a second Crunch here in just a second. In comes the Dragon Claw on CMP. Our opponent likely will let this go. They're going to be content with that shield advantage, and they bring in a Tentacruel. This is a little bit of an awkward situation to be in here. I'm going to go for a Dragon Claw as a bait, potentially save some energy on our Guzzlord and swap out to our Drifblim. I know that a lot of the time there's going to be Pokemon in the backline that Drifblim is just very good against, and because our opponent is staying in this matchup, it makes me think this might be a Blizzard, and it might also be a Pokemon in the backline weak to our Drifblim. Blizzard does end up getting shielded, which is fantastic to see, but because they do have Blizzard here, it's going to be a very scary matchup for our Drifblim if I don't start getting debuffs off. I would assume if they're staying in this matchup, though, they're very weak to Drifblim in the backline. Maybe that means Gastrodon could be back there, so I'm going to go for another Icy Wind, try to get a bait and get that final shield from them, as well as debuffing their attack stat so I can survive this Blizzard. In comes a charge move here in just a second, likely going to be that Blizzard, which means at this point, Drifblim will take a lot of damage, but we have done quite a bit of work here with it, and in the backline, as we thought, it is actually a Gastrodon. I'm going to instantly swap out here to our Weezing because I know at this point I want to get some use out of it. So before giving them a ton of energy so they can just one-shot us with an Earth Power, I'm going to come in, start spamming out Brutal Swings, and see how they want to play this out. I know if they don't throw any Charge Moves, I can actually reach 3 Brutal Swings, which is basically enough to knock them out, and if they do throw energy, then they won't have enough to knock out our Drifblim later on this game. In comes our final Brutal Swing. Our opponent tries to CMP us on the last move there at the last second, but unfortunately for them, we are just a little bit too spammy. We knock out this Gastrodon, and in comes that Tentacruel, but once again, we have both our Guzzlord and our Drifblim in the backline to win us that match. All right, next game here, Guzzlord up against a Cobalion, a very interesting Pokemon, also a very terrible core breaker for us to see. Obviously, if we did have Overheat or Play Rough, this matchup for our Weezing wouldn't be all that bad, but because we have Sludge and Brutal Swing, our Charge Moves are only resisted here, which means the longer this goes on, the better it is for Cobalion. I'm at least going to bait that I could have Overheat here. Let's see if our opponent does opt to shield this up. Brutal Swing, though, getting no shielded, which means now all of our energy is kind of going to waste. They come in with a Drapion, another Pokemon, which resists all of our Charge Moves here that we are currently running. I'm going to go for a Sludge because it does do a little bit more raw damage, and our opponent CMPs on either a Sludge Bomb or maybe an Aqua Tail here, depending on how much energy they had. In comes a Charge Move. It is just an Aqua Tail, and since the switch clocks are so desynced at this point, I'm going to come back in with Guzzlord and start overfarming as much energy as we can. At this point, we have seen 2 Pokemon, which are a little bit awkward for our team to face, but we'll try our best to go for just a bit of an overfarm, maybe use this energy against that Cobalion if it does come back in, and if they stay in this matchup, then we can just knock out this Drapion. They actually stored a bit of HP and a bit of energy on that Drapion by swapping out right then, but because now we have so much energy against this Cobalion, I can just go for a bit of a battle of attrition here, go for as many Charge Moves as I can, and our opponent ends up CMPing us here on this next Charge Move, likely a Sacred Sword, but our Guzzlord is just bulky enough to survive, get off this Dragon Claw, and chip them down even further. With that said, I know Stone Edge is a move that they could have on this Pokemon, which would be a little bit annoying if they did end up having it. Well, I mean, I think we've already seen it at this point, but because they do have it, our Drifblim would take a lot of damage. So instead, I'm going to come in with our Galarian Weezing and go for a Brutal Swing once again to try to finish off this Pokemon. If they do shield this up, then at the very least, I'll have neutralized it. If they end up letting it go, well, okay, that's an interesting play. They shield it up, and then they swap out here to their Drapion. At this point, I can go for a Brutal Swing, and if they no-shield, I might even get a full farm down before even a single Charge Move is going to be reached. So, honestly, not the worst-case scenario here. Our opponent showing in the backline, it is a Giratina. This Pokemon is a little bit tricky here for a Drifblim, especially up this much energy, but our Weezing has enough energy on it. We can reach this Brutal Swing, and since they no-shield that, now potentially an Astonish down could win us this game. With that said, I know they have a lot of super effective damage left over this game. They also have that Cobalion with a Stone Edge, which means I can never shield anything that this Giratina is going to throw. Fortunately for us, though, our opponent, for some reason, ended up going for a Dragon Claw on that first charge move, Ancient Power on the second one, which does quite a bit of damage, but because now we can reach an Icy Wind, we can lower their damage output and potentially draw their final shield. We have a lot of fast move pressure left over. This next Astonish actually knocks out the Giratina, which means now this Cobalion has nowhere to hide. We can fast move them down. They realize that, and they top left. All right, next game here, a Drifblim in the lead up against our Guzzlord. We know that Drifblim does generally run Icy Wind, which is super effective here, but because we are able to go for a Crunch on CMP, we can outpace them. Well, not necessarily outpace, but at the very least survive one Icy Wind and go for the Crunch, but they make a fantastic catch on their Cobalion. No defense drop for me here, but because we are able to at least get switch advantage against a very tricky Pokemon, we can go for a Shadow Ball here in just a second to knock them out, and then potentially go for an Icy Wind or a Shadow Ball against their own Drifblim. In comes that Stone Edge. It does so much damage to us here, but we can overfarm, go for a Shadow Ball right before the next Stone Edge, and try to either draw a shield or get a knockout on a very tricky Pokemon. In comes the Shadow Ball, they do let it go, and now we have an Icy Wind ready to go if that Drifblim is going to show its face once again this battle. If they do end up coming in with Drifblim, I have to instantly go for the Icy Wind. That might have been a CMP here, and if it was, we won the CMP, meaning there's going to be a lot of energy wasted by this Pokemon. In comes the Icy Wind from our opponent here. If they end up undercharging and we don't get knocked out, I'm actually going to swap into our Weezing, knowing that we have so much pressure against this Pokemon, I don't want to give them any extra energy that we don't have to. In comes our Brutal Swing. Our opponent at this point likely will not be able to shield this move, knowing they don't get knocked out, but they do shield, which is a very interesting play. I don't know what their exact plan is right now. They give us a nice Fairy Wind sneak there, and because they're throwing a move, I'm almost certain it's an Icy Wind, but it feels like they're kind of weak to our Weezing at this point. But I guess they're not. It's a Fortress in the backline, which is a very interesting Pokemon to see. We have a lot of Charge Moves, though, loaded. We can go for a Brutal Swing spam against this, and then potentially just go for Crunches to finish off this game. Brutal Swing number 2 is coming through. Our opponent likely will have to just throw a Charge Move at some point if they don't want to get chipped down into range where even just fast moves could knock them out here. And because they are such a clunky Pokemon using a 4-turn move of Volt Switch, there is a good chance we can even make a catch if we want to. at this point, we basically knocked them out here with debuffed Brutal Swings. Fortress is going to get caught on as well. This Rock Tomb or Earthquake is going to do almost nothing here to our Drifblim because at this point they end up undercharging it as well. They do get a bit extra of an energy lead here with their Drifblim, but now I can come back in with our Weezing, go for yet another Brutal Swing against them, and potentially knock them out. Down goes the Drifblim, in comes the Fortress, and at this point, I can just go for another Brutal Swing. This Pokemon is spamming out so many charge moves this game. It might not be quite enough to knock out, but it will put them into a fast food farm down range. Our opponent is now going to realize that, and they end up top lefting. All right, next matchup here, we're going to see a Galarian Weezing once again. So many of these in the lead today, but we have been able to deal with them at least somewhat, so we're going to see if we can do that once again. We're going to go for a Sludge instantly if they do let us, which gives us our one turn back on the swap-in. Sludge is going to be thrown, and if it ends up landing, does about half of their HP. Once again, since they're over-farming here, I'm kind of expecting it to be Overheat as one of the moves that they have, so I'm going to shield up a move and see what they're going to throw. It is just a Sludge, which means obviously it wouldn't have done that much damage to us here, but in comes a Malamar to try to neutralize our Poison-type Pokemon. With that said, their charge move pressure is almost non-existent against Weezing because obviously they're using Superpower and Foul Play, both of which are resisted by our Weezing. We have yet another charge move as well. This Brutal Swing might not knock them out, but it will draw a shield because our opponent wanted to play a little bit safe and they didn't want to let go of all its energy. In comes a charge move. I think Guzzlord at this point, though, is just going to be used as a way to sacrifice its health to make sure this Malamar's energy goes nowhere too useful. That Weezing is still around, and Guzzlord against Weezing, as we all know, is a absolutely pitiful matchup to be in. Superpower does end up doing quite a bit of damage, and we end up getting put into very close to just 1 or 2 Fairy Winds of getting knocked out, but we do get a parting move off with this Crunch. It should be enough at this point to put them into a range where just a Sludge, maybe even a Farm Down from Drifblim could knock them out here. In comes Drifblim. Our opponent is going to swap out into a Galarian Moltres, and unfortunately for us, even though we do have our Weezing, which is still around, I don't think Sludge and Fairy Wind damage is going to be quite enough to knock them out before they can Sucker Punch us all the way down. Sludge does end up getting shielded. Our opponent CMP'd on an Ancient Power here. I think I need a little bit more damage, so I'm going to shield this up and hope at this point that I can knock them out with our Fast Move and Charge Move Pressure with Galarian Weezing. If we can, then we might be able to have a chance this game, but I don't think it will be enough. In Great League, it might do a bit more damage, but in Ultra League, things are just a little bit bulkier. They survive at this point, and they can reach either an Ancient Power, or if they're smart, they're going to go for a Brave Bird, which does do quite a bit more raw damage. In comes their charge move. Yeah, it's a Brave Bird. Basically one-shots us here. Our opponent, unnecessarily, may I add, goes for a combo play with their Weezing just to dominate us here. Overheat ends up knocking us out, and unfortunately, just barely not able to flip that matchup. All right, next game, what are we going to see? Guzzlord up against a Shadow Feraligatr, a very neutral lead matchup, but obviously they could have access to Ice Beam, which would do quite a bit of damage, but in Ultra League, we are able to actually pretty completely survive that move, so it's not that bad for us here. In comes a charge move right on 7, so I know it could be an Ice Beam. I'm going to call the bait, but unfortunately for us, they end up landing the heavy-hitting charge move. In comes a Malamar, and because we know our Weezing absorbs all the energy, I'm going to go for a bit of a chip and dip, come in with our Weezing after throwing this Crunch, and trying to neutralize this Malamar. We even get a defense drop here, which is actually pretty nice. It makes it so this Brutal Swing should come very close to knocking out if our opponent opts to let this go. Let's see what they're going to do. Brutal Swing is going to be thrown. Our opponent, unfortunately, does survive with just enough HP to get one move off, but this next Fairy Wind should knock them out, making it so they don't get a second charge move through. Foul Play does a decent amount of damage, saying it's resisted, but because Weezing is bulky enough, we can survive. These Shadow Claws go for a Sludge against this Feraligatr, and our Dragon Tails have put it pretty low to the point where this should be enough to knock out potentially. Our opponent does end up shielding it up, so they might be a little bit weak to Weezing here in the backline, and I know at this point I could shield this move up, get their final shield, or potentially knock out this Feraligatr, so I might as well. And if I do shield this move and then they shield this move as well, I should probably swap out because I don't want to give this Feraligatr any extra energy that I don't have to here, because energy advantage Feraligatr is always a very scary thing. They end up swapping out, very smart of our opponent to do here, into their Shadow Primeape, but since it's a Shadow Primeape, as I was saying, this is a very squishy Pokemon. A Dragon Claw plus like 2 or 3 Dragon Tails here put it well into like 40% HP range. You have to keep in mind, though, that Feraligatr does have just a bit of energy on it. In fact, I think they're actually at 4 Shadow Claws, which means they're 1 away from a Hydro Cannon. I have to save my shield here for the second Rage Fist, and then I have to make sure if that Feraligatr comes in to instantly debuff their attack stat and to try to farm them all the way down. If I do get a debuff against this Feraligatr, I don't think the Hydro Cannon will be quite enough to knock out, so by going for this Icy Wind, it's going to force them to go for an Ice Beam against us, giving us 1 or 2 extra Astonishes of Fast Move Pressure. It's not quite enough to knock them out here with that 1 Astonish plus the Icy Wind, but our Weezing is still very much around. We can go for a Fairy Wind down, and this game should be ours. In comes Weezing, 1 Fairy Wind does it, and we were able to take the win in that game. All right, Guzzlord up against a Cradily. This Pokemon is such a nightmare in Ultra League. I have one I could use myself. I haven't built it quite yet, but you do need the 100% one to actually use it here in Ultra League. It is such a bulky Pokemon, and you combine that with the fact that it has access to Rock Tomb. It is a bit of a nightmare sometimes if you don't have a hard answer. With that said, I am avoiding this with our Flying type Pokemon, Drifblim, so I guess that's kind of good. Rock Tomb, not the hardest hitting attack out there, and since we are resisting Bullet Seeds, Guzzlord's not the worst matchup, but I'm almost certain they would win this matchup the longer it goes on thanks to these debuffs. I'm going to go once again for a Dragon Claw just to be able to keep in pace with these Rock Tombs. It's always 4 for a Dragon Claw, 4 for a Rock Tomb. If I were to go for a Crunch, they get an extra debuff off against us before we're able to go for another charge move. So I'm just going to go straight Dragon Claw and see what they want to do. Here comes this next charge move here. Our opponent likely going to let this go for a Rock Tomb against us, or I guess potentially swap out here to their own Drapion, another non-Shadow Drapion. So we've seen a lot of these today. And what charge move are they going to throw? It could be a Sludge Bomb with how much energy they have, but it might just be an Aqua Tail. Weezing is at this point able to survive 2 charge moves since this is a non-Shadow Drapion, which makes my life just a little bit more comfortable, and Sludge will do a little bit of damage, but not quite enough here to two-shot them. In comes another Aqua Tail. We did end up CMPing them, so we know we do win CMP. It's going to be an interesting matchup, though, if they shield this Drapion, because we really don't want to see it with our Drifblim later on. In comes a Sludge. Our opponent at this point could shield us up if they want to preserve a bit of HP, and they actually do opt to do that, which is kind of interesting to me. And since I know they know their counts, I'm going to go for the Brutal Swing right before I reach the Sludge, just to get any sort of trip damage that I can against this thing. Brutal Swing does do quite a bit of damage to them here, but we have to keep in mind there is still a Cradily in the backline with a Rock Tomb. We don't know what the final Pokemon is, and we also know that we want nothing to do with this matchup with our Drifblim. In comes our Guzzlord. We go for a Dragon Tail down. They reach a Charge Move, but at this point, I think I do have to shield if I want to get this Dragon Tail off, and I know Drifblim would have a nightmare to take this Pokemon out from here, so I will have to shield and farm them all the way down. What is going to come in at this point? Our opponent is thinking for just a second here. In comes, what was that, a Shadow Zapdos? That's a crazy Pokemon to see. If they no-shield this move, though, I think we can farm down. If they shielded it, we go for an Icy Wind, and at this point, I know I have to no-shield this Rock Tomb, try to fast move all the way down against the Zapdos, and see if we can win this game. A Thunderbolt would do way more damage than that super effective Rock Tomb, so Drifblim, despite being against an Electric and a Rock-type Pokemon here in the backline, we're going to try our best to knock them both out. In comes a Drill Peck bait, and now I'm going to go for an Astonish, go for an Icy Wind to lower that attack stat, make sure I can't get farmed down here, and force them either to throw extra energy or to let me farm them down. Our opponent at that point realizes not enough HP on Zapdos, they top left, or they let me knock them out. GG's to them. Alright, next game, a Shadow Typhlosion. This Pokemon is a little bit offensive, but unfortunately for our opponent here, we do have the Guzzlord, which is a great answer to that Fire-type Pokemon. In comes on the Say-Swap here, a Lapras, a Pokemon, which is a little bit tricky for this team. I know if they have Ice Beam, it is even worse for us, because Ice Beam obviously is super effective, and they are able to do quite a bit of damage to us here. In comes the charge move. What is it gonna be? It is an Ice Beam, which does way more damage than I'd like, especially saying our Guzzlord is our best answer here to that Typhlosion. In comes Dragon Claw. Our opponent could shield us up. I did get a defense drop. I try to go for a farm down with our Drifblim because I do want to preserve some HP on our Guzzlord in the backline. Ice Beam does end up landing once again against our Drifblim, and our opponent at this point will get a nasty farm down against our own Drifblim here. This is kind of awkward. I've played this game out pretty bad, I think, at this point, because I have sacrificed my best counter with my Guzzlord. At least a lot of its HP is gone. I did get a shield with that Icy Wind. I got a lot of fast move pressure here, but Weezing is going to have a lot of work to do. Guzzlord comes in. Our opponent instantly throws a charge move, which is going to give us a full Dragon Tail sneak. I'm going to shield. I don't want to have to deal with these Shadow Incinerates with our Shadow Weezing, and I want to see what I can do here with our Guzzlord. In comes yet another charge move. It's likely going to be another Blast Burn. I'm going to shield it up and see what they want to do. They do opt to go for a full-on Blast Burn. They come in with a Virizion, which is a breath of fresh air here. This Pokemon is probably exactly what we needed to see in the backline to give us a bit more of a wiggle room in this endgame. In comes a charge move, just a Leaf Blade though, no Stone Edge going to be revealed here, and because we have a Weezing that has both super effective Fairy Wind and Sludge damage against this Pokemon, we can survive this next one, overfarm just a bit more energy, and start spamming out Sludges, Brutal Swings, and basically everything else you might ever want. In comes the Sludge. Our opponent might survive this, but it would be a very close survive. They do on like literally 1 HP, so we get 1 extra Fairy Wind, and now we can spam out all of these charge moves against whatever is going to come in. Our opponent's thinking for a second. They decide that Typhlosion is going to be the play to come in with here, and comes our Brutal Swing. We have a bit of energy on Guzzlord. We have a lot of energy on Weezing, so as long as we can knock out this Typhlosion, we should be in a good spot. Our opponent, though, comes in with this Lapras. I'm going to make sure that we don't get Sidewave down, because I know I have energy on both my Guzzlord and this Weezing. All I need to do is make sure we don't somehow lose a Pokemon here, and we can win this game. We can now just combo with our Guzzlord, go for this Dragon Claw against this Typhlosion before they can reach a charge move, and we take the win in that very tricky match. All right, next matchup, Guzzlord up against a Unovan Stunfisk, a very, very tricky Pokemon for a lot of Pokemon to face. Guzzlord, though, is probably one of the better answers just in general to this, and they say swap a Zygarde. This Pokemon is a little bit tricky to deal with, mainly because Zygarde obviously is a Dragon type, but it's also a Ground type. Because of the fact it could have Earthquake, I'll likely have to go down Shields here, even if they don't have access to it, just to be safe and just to keep that Ufisk away from our Drifblim. In comes yet another Brutal Swing from our Weezing. Our opponent hasn't thrown a single Charge Move yet, which is a very interesting play. In comes their first charge move. What is it going to be? Hopefully an Earthquake Shield will be coming through, but no, it's on a Crunch, and they get a defense drop here too, but they throw very, very soon after. So this could be a Bulldoze, I guess, but I would have imagined they would have thrown that first, so it's just a Crunch, which means now we can go for a bit of a farm down and make it so we have so much energy against that Ufisk in the backline. If that Ufisk does come back in here, we can go for 3 full Brutal Swings before they can even knock us out. And because they're using their Thundershock fast move, they're never going to fast move farm us down. So I can go for just a ton of Brutal Swings, spam out these moves as much as I can to chip down this Pokemon, and potentially set up our backline for success. In comes yet another Brutal Swing, our third one already against this Pokemon. How many Brutal Swings has Weezing thrown this video? Way too many, honestly, at this point. In comes yet another Brutal Swing, but our opponent, very good on their counts, ends up throwing right before my final one will be reached. In comes Mud Bomb, it knocks us out. They have a bit of extra energy, but Guzzlord should be a pretty good Pokemon to see, and in comes an Air Slash Mandibuzz here in the back line. This is such a bad core breaker here. Well, not necessarily a core breaker, right? But there's 2 Pokemon in general that are very good against my Drifblim here in the back line, so I have to just kind of decide where do I want to use my Drifblim, and since this is an Air Slash Mandibuzz, I feel like this might still be its best spot. We have Icy Wind, which is super effective against this flying type Pokemon, and despite Astonish being resisted, it is still a very high damaging fast move, so it is kind of chipping them down here. My Guzzlord at this point will be my win condition. I did end up shielding that first foul play though, just to make sure that I can survive these charge moves just a little bit easier here. I'm going to go for yet another Icy Wind here to try to debuff their attack stat and make it so this next charge move is going to do even less damage. I would love to see this get no-shielded because at this point, that is the biggest amount of damage I can get against this Mandibuzz, and I instantly swap out here to Guzzlord. I was actually kind of expecting them to try to go for a combo play against my Drifblim there, but because we're able to at the very least soak this energy on Guzzlord, we should still be in a pretty good spot where that Mandibuzz is still going to struggle to knock us out. In comes a Dragon Claw. If they opt to shield this move up, I can go for a full farm down Dragon Claw to Mandibuzz. If they no-shield, then I think I might even just Dragon Tail down through the rest of this game. I know they have Air Slash, which is neutral against our Guzzlord, but Air Slash and Aerial Ace are not efficient moves. I should be able to survive them, get a full fast food farm down, and this game is likely going to be ours. In comes another charge move. Guzzlord is very bulky. Aerial Ace is not a strong move. We survive it, and we can go for a Dragon Tail down Drifblim in the backline, winning us this game. GG's to our opponents there. We had a very fun day of battles with this team. Honestly, a little bit soft to a couple pretty common Pokemon. I didn't realize until I started playing the battles how weak we were to with Steelix, that is. And unfortunately for us, there were quite a few Steelix just in general, but not enough to keep us down. I went 16-9 with this team, getting to 25-46, which at this point in the season is pretty respectable, and I'm pretty happy with this. And once again, Shadow Galarian Weezing has been a very fun Pokemon in Ultra League. Basically my MVP this rotation, so very happy with it. And if you have one, definitely give both Guzzlord and Weezing a go. All right, well, thank you so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed the battles and you want to see more content like this in the future, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. It helps out the channel a ton, and I would really appreciate it. But thank you again for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.